Everybody, and welcome back. Now I'm going to request Chris King, first of all, before his presentation, he wanted to say something on behalf of the Royal Philatelic Society of London, and after that he will follow with his presentation. So Chris, you are welcome. The floor is yours. Please.
Could I have that water bottle? You raise your hand if you're not here. I think the first thing that I should do is to say thank you to somebody who has not been thanked yet, which is Chaitanya Dev. Nobody said thank you to you, Chaitanya, just because you were saying thank you to everybody else. So first of all, thank you to you, and thank you also to Sheila, your wife, for helping my wife get dressed this morning, because it's only the second time she's ever worn a sari. And I should say also thank you on behalf of the Society to Mark and David for all of the work that he's put in. Of course, together with the rest of the team, Kapil Gogri, Ramu Srinivasa, and thanks to Rajesh Kumar Bagri for his contribution today, later, and also for last night. Mrs. Damayanti Pitti for her presence here, and we're truly honoured, and Dr. Charles Lobo, who has disappeared. He's left already, but thank you. And Dr. Sita Pateja for her legendary collection, which she didn't bring today, to my immense disappointment. And we also have a thank you to Patrick Masalis here. And of course he couldn't be here because his wife says that weekends are for the family. And whatever Patrick does, he does really try very hard to keep his weekends free for his family. Otherwise, I'm sure he'd be here.
Not everybody's lucky like you.
I tell you, having a wife who's a collector is a mixed blessing. Because sometimes we have to buy things that she wants. We saw also earlier on the Stockholmia exhibition, which is in May next year, but actually our 150th anniversary starts in February with Stampex, where we're celebrating the stamps of King George V. On the 10th of April, which is the day which the Society was founded 150 years ago, we have a lunch in London, and if anybody is in London, when we start to advertise the tickets, you should buy them immediately, because there are only about 150 tickets. Through the course of the year, we have an event in Washington. We're being hosted by the National Postal Museum of the Smithsonian. Later in the year still, we have a celebration in Hong Kong by some of our members in Hong Kong, and we're going to see an exhibition of gems of Asian philately. And then, of course, we will end the year with London 2020, which I think Frank might say something about later. Now, it has been pointed out that this is the most sociable of hobbies. People have the wrong idea about collectors. They think that we sit at home and we collect our stamps and we put them in our books and on our pages. But actually the best thing for me about philately is the sociable activities, the lunches, the dinners, the celebrations, the meetings. And I'm delighted to be able to be here today with my colleagues from London to meet all of you who are, many of you, members of the Society as part of our sociable activities. We learn from each other by sharing, and we learn from each other by asking questions. And I have a question, which I got from a friend of mine on Facebook 2 days ago. He said when he was last in Bangalore, there were two very old Victorian red post boxes manufactured by a company called Penfold, or designed by somebody called Penfold. Frank's the expert on letterboxes, not me. But there were two Penfold letterboxes in Bangalore. And he said if I can get a photograph of each of them, he'll buy me a pint of beer. And I can't find them. So I need help. If anybody knows where the Penfold letterboxes are, please catch me at lunchtime, and I need photographs by the end of today because I'm going back tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock. So we need your help. All right. Now, I just want to do a few slides here to talk a little bit about our new building. Right. It took me a long time to lift this crest off the page to give it a transparent background. Yeah. So, this is 15 Abchurch Lane in the City of London. I was asked just now, how did we finance this? Well, the answer is, in 1925, we bought a building in Marylebone in London. It cost £6,000. And it took us from 1919 to 1928 to raise the funds to buy this building and to equip the building. And in the end, we spent something like £12,750 on the building at 41 Devonshire Place. Well, we sold it last year for £10,050,000. So if you want to know how to make money, you buy property, you keep it, you give it to your children, and then you tell your children to give it to their children. And if you're very lucky, you can make a lot of money. It's easy, isn't it? So we sold our building in Marylebone for £10.05 million, and we bought this building here in the City of London for £10 million. You think that's fantastic? We made £50,000. But by the time you've paid the lawyers and the surveyors and all of the other professionals that you need to have to pay, and the designers and the planners, we're a little bit short of money. But I'm going to tell you a bit about the building. We want to convert this building into our new home. Not just a home for the society in London, but a home for anybody who uses the services of the Royal Philatelic Society London. We intend to meet our needs for the future with a world-class philatelic centre for the world in the heart of London. This is such, if ever you come to the UK, you are not more than 1 hour from any airport or train station or whatever around London from this building in the centre. We want to meet the needs of the members in the UK and overseas, and to reach out to a wider audience, not just philatelists, but historians and collectors of other things, and people who collect paper artifacts. How do you, preserving paper, if it's a book, or a document, or a treaty, or a stamp, the same rules apply to conserving paper. We want to talk about conservation and other things to our much wider audience. We want our members to be able to get to our libraries. One of the great things about packing the Royal is we're finding things we didn't know we had. It's like when you move house, except we're moving house after 93 years, is it? Anyway, after nearly a century. And it's amazing what you can lose in the course of a century in the building. So we're going to improve access to the libraries, our collections, and to the public. It will be possible to come into our building with a ramp, no steps, to get to all 7 floors in a lift. And when the London transport people finish their new station next to us, there will be a lift from the station to street level, level access into our new building, less than 5 minutes away, and level access to every floor. So we're making sure that people can get in, and we need to support our staff. Anybody who's been to the Royal in London will see that our staff are not very well housed. So, and you saw this earlier, this is a cutaway of the new building. So we're going to have a library, a reading room, a secure reading room for valuable books, areas for our staff, places where our library and museum can work in processing new equipment and in new acquisitions and new books. We're going to improve the working space for our experts. We're going to have a room where people can examine these artifacts, which is secure. The philatelic collections, and we have a very big philatelic collection. It's never been properly housed and never been possible to manage it properly. So we're going to have a new workroom. Proper office space for our curator. We have a professional, permanent member of staff who's a curator and another one as a librarian. We're going to have properly controlled storage with humidity control and temperature control, secure vaults. One of the things I'd like to do, and the Society hasn't agreed with me yet, but it might, is to have the big auction houses having auctions in our building so we can sell them the space. But then we need places for them to keep their material overnight, so we need secure storage. And we're going to have 2 large rooms, each of which will take 120. We've got a boardroom, the very pretty room that you saw earlier, seating for 60. A members' lounge, reception cloakroom, kitchen, a permanent museum display, temporary museum displays through the building, administration office, IT server and communications room, and a staff room, which we've never really had until now. So, here you can see the secure basement archive, and above the new library, and above that the members' room, and above that a display and meeting room. And these 2 rooms together we can show 1,344 pages. At the moment it's about 580. We can seat 120 in each of these rooms. This is the administration office. At the front and at the back we have the expert room, and there are adjacent rooms for storage. And on top we have a function room or a boardroom. And in fact, if you wanted to have a meeting in London for a board or for a small society or whatever, you can come here and find that space available for a fee. So this is how one of the function rooms looked when we bought it. And we're going to have, I love this LED screen, we want one of these, so this is coming home with us. But the screen will come down here, and we'll have the sound system. It'll be a proper meeting room of a professional standard. Here's another view of the other meeting room. And the trouble is that, a few more pictures around the building. That's the staircase. We love this staircase. Looking from the top all the way down through the building. The way my knees are, in about 5 years' time, I won't be able to use that staircase. And that's the pretty room on the top floor. And there's how the members' room used to look when it was a club. It was a dining club until we bought it. But that, unfortunately, is how the basement looks today. That picture was taken about a week and a half ago. So we've got a big strip-out program going on. And we will be moving into this building by the 7th of June next year, we hope. We really hope that that will happen. So, and here comes the hard bit. We're looking for money. I know you've paid to come here, but that's normal. Now we're looking for money, and one of the things we thought we would suggest that together India had an India room in our new building. There's a nice little room here. That would make an India room, and I've got my favourite stamp there on the wall already.
Inverted.
I'm afraid, can we borrow it, please? We make some, yes. Well, I'm actually having a few made today. But, so, this is serious. We've paid for the building, but we now need, I've learned this, we now need 35 lakh pounds. 35 lakh pounds, 3.5 million to make the building fit for the next 100 years. We have 1.5 million. So we need 2 more million. You can always expect the lady who looks after the housekeeping to know the value of money. So that's what we're doing. And I just leave that with you to think about. We need as much money as we can lay our hot, sticky hands on. And it's something we're trying to do for world philately for the next century. The Society now has 2,400 and some members. 12 years ago, we had 1,600 and some members. The Society is growing. We have members in 81 countries. And we are the only truly international philatelic society. And we welcome members on one basis only, which is they want to know more about philately and they wish to become more expert. Now, I've said enough about that. I've said my thank yous. One question.
I have 2 questions actually. One,
You're limited to one.
or I combine both of them into one.
Have 2 questions. On you go.
So, one, how eco-friendly is this building going to be? Okay. Secondly, how much have you received from various philatelic associations around the world, okay, who contributed to this? In fact, what was the average collection?
The largest collection, the largest amount of money we've had so far is £175,000 from an American collector. And the smallest we had was when Patrick Marsalis said to a meeting of the Society, I want something from every member of the Society, it doesn't matter how little. And one of our members came up, put his hand in his pocket and gave Patrick a penny. And he said, you start with 1 penny, and eventually, if you keep them and look after them, you'll have enough money, Mr. President. So, it's quite a big range. Quite a lot of members are putting quite a lot of money in, which is why we've got the 1.5 million already out of our 3.5. So we're getting there. How eco-friendly is the building? Part of that expense, of course, is to make the building eco-friendly. So let's take the lighting. I mean, this is 7 floors of a building, and you saw there were chandeliers. All the chandeliers were taken out of the building, they've gone away to be rewired. And for the, I think that's for you, all of the chandeliers have been taken out of the building for rewiring, but they're all coming back with LED lights rather than filament lights. We're stripping out all of the existing ducting and AC and the motors, and we're replacing it with modern, low energy, high efficiency heating equipment, cooling equipment throughout the building. So we're replacing all of the 1990s technology with 21st century technology, and that of course is part of the very considerable price we're having to pay. We're improving insulation. We're doing all of the things you might reasonably expect, and we're doing that for 2 reasons. I mean, one, because it's right, but secondly, because the City of London, who's our new local controlling authority, has very strong policies about low energy conservation and green energy and so on, so we're doing that. Are we going to be successful in doing this? Yes, I think we are. but I also think in 25 years' time they'll look back and think we were very generous in our use of electricity. So things will change. But we're doing the best we can given current circumstances. Okay? Thank you. Now I'd better go on. If you want to talk to me about any of this, especially if you want to open your bank account, please see me at lunchtime. But now I'm going to do what I should be here for, which is to make my presentation. So thank you for your patience. I collect a very small piece of the Earth, which is about 80 kilometers north to south and about 60 kilometers east to west. And I thought when I started collecting this stuff, this is going to be easy. I can make my collection, I can make my exhibit, and it will easily be finished. Well, I'm nearly 30 years on. I still don't have everything I would like to have, and I know I will never finish. And I turned this little piece of Earth into 3 8-frame FIP international exhibits. 2 large gold and 1 gold. In fact, 1 gold, 1 large gold, and 1 Grand Prix runner-up. And I'm never going to get a Grand Prix because I don't collect the right stuff. But very close. So, but I'm going to talk to you about how to make a postal history exhibit. And, you know, when you're exhibiting, you're only partly doing this for yourself. Partly, you're saying to your peers, your friends, people who might not be your friends, and to others, what do you think of this? And if you're not prepared to accept the judgment of your peers, don't exhibit. On the other hand, you will never learn so much about your material as you do when you're making an exhibit. Your choice. I couldn't resist the elephants. These are Danish elephants from Tranquebar, I suspect. But there we are. So, if you're going to submit yourself to the judgment of your peers, you better make sure they understand what it is you're trying to do. And we talked yesterday about introductory pages, but you need to tell your judge all the way through your exhibit what it is you're doing. I'll just give points. We talked a little about this yesterday. Treatment, the way you tell your story, 20 points. Importance, 10 points. Importance is really hard. How important is an exhibit of the Duchy of Schleswig? Hands up if you've ever heard of the Duchy of Schleswig. Hands up if you've never heard of the Duchy of Schleswig. You see what I mean? How do I make that important? I've succeeded. I'll come to that later. Philatelic knowledge and research, 35 points. Condition, 10 points. Rarity, 20 points. And presentation, 5 points. Now, I'm going to tell you in a minute that the first 75 points are free. Now, each of these points, when you're judging, is considered in isolation. We say, how many points do you think this is worth as presentation? And Frank went through the process last night extremely well. And you need to know that your points, whatever they are, in one category, will influence points in another category. Now, I said you should read the guidelines. These are the general regulations for the evaluation of philatelic exhibits, published by the FIP, f-i-p.ch, and look for them. So, treatment is an evaluation of the completeness and correctness of the selected material made by the exhibitor to illustrate the chosen subject. That's a big statement. So treatment is completeness and correctness of the selected material. Selected material. You have to choose your material carefully and wisely. Very hard to do when you first start collecting because you try to buy everything. And then 15 years later you realise you made a terrible mistake and you shouldn't have bought 90% of it. Okay, philatelic importance, the significance of the subject chosen by the exhibitor in terms of its scope, degree of difficulty, and the philatelic interest. Scope, degree of difficulty, philatelic interest. And you have to start to consider what the guidelines and regulations say almost before you put a piece on a page. Something I never did. I started by putting the pieces on the page, and then I found out what the rules were later on. So knowledge, the knowledge of the exhibitor expressed by the items chosen. A proper analysis of the items chosen for display. A proper analysis. So here they are. Condition. The quality of this displayed material considering the standard of the material that exists. Some material exists only in very poor quality. But like Frank, you choose the best you can. And with his single stamp with the reversed watermark, he chose to include that, and not the one where there were more copies. So it's the material that you display which is important. I said to those of you who were here who were at the post office last night, your exhibit has to speak for you because you are not there to speak for it. So it has to stand alone and speak to the judge, to speak to the observer. Rarity, relative difficulty of acquisition. And I can promise you a little piece of territory as big as I collect has got some very rare things. Just it's very hard to understand quite what it is that's rare, so I have to do a lot of explaining in my exhibit. Presentation, an evaluation of the overall aesthetic. The overall aesthetic. Not just that one page looks nice, or one frame looks nice, but the overall appearance. So there's a lot to consider in making an exhibit. And Frank made the very important point that an exhibit is not the same as a display, it's not the same as a collection, it is something that stands by itself and is a thing of its own. So, the regulations talk about the whole exhibit. And if you're making an exhibit, you need to think about the whole exhibit. And again, like Frank, anybody who wants this PowerPoint can have it. It's best as a PowerPoint, but if you just ask Mark and he'll make sure you get it. So, in an exhibit, it's not just the individual pieces, it's the sum of all of the parts. And that's hard sometimes because, you know, we have the pieces that we love. And they have to have the same, each plays its part in the overall exhibit. So, you have to consider the subject before you consider the treatment. Is your subject capable of development? The first two stamps of Schleswig-Holstein, as I said last night, are not capable of development and you should not do it. And you can think of plenty of things you should not do. So, is your subject capable of development? Is it sufficiently varied to be interesting? There are some immensely boring subjects around in philately and many people collect them. But it doesn't necessarily make for a varied and interesting exhibit. Is the choice of subject universal enough to be understood? Because actually philatelic principles apply to every country. can you tell a story in one country that somebody who collects another country can feel comfortable in understanding? Has it been studied to death? One of the reasons I picked the Duchy of Schleswig, which incidentally never issued its own stamps, was because it had not been studied to death. Anything I could do was relatively new. So, capability of development, varied, interesting, universal, and has it been studied to death? Now, people do make exhibits of things that have been studied to death, but I think they've got a greater challenge than what I started to try to do. Otherwise, people wouldn't continue to make exhibits of the penny black, for example. So, some subjects will do better than others. So, importance. You should avoid unimportant subjects because they're usually easier to treat. So, you know, a capital city is going to be better than a small village or a small district. Mail that goes between two states is in many respects more important than mail that goes internally in one state. International mail is generally more important than mail that is not international. Complexity usually beats simplicity in postal history. So if it's quite hard to explain, you might end up with more points than something that's easy to explain. But you also might find it much harder to make the explanation. So the other thing is there sufficient material? Is there sufficient material of good quality? Is there sufficient interesting material? Because, you know, you can collect things and you can carry on collecting, I don't know, tuppenny stamps on postcards or penny stamps on postcards forever and ever and ever and ever, and they're never going to be very interesting. So is there sufficient interesting material? I piled up here some of my boxes, because the way I collect is I buy stuff until I've got enough stuff to try to make it into an exhibit or a display. And this is the Leaning Tower of Pisa. So you have to choose, when you're choosing material, you go through your boxes and is it aesthetically pleasing? Does it look nice? Is it in good condition? Is it interesting to look at? Are the contents interesting? In postal history today, you can actually refer to the contents, especially if the contents tell something about the postal service. I'm sending you this letter via whatever town it is, because that's the quickest way to send it to you, my son, writes his mother. And so you know that that route was the quickest route at the time. And that's the postal history interest. Read the contents of the letters. Does it demonstrate rarity? Is it relevant? Some people put 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 of the same thing in simply because they're valuable or expensive. Don't do that, you only want one. Why tell the story twice? Does it help you show the judge that you have knowledge? There's the duplication point again. Does it make good research material? Does it take your story forward? Is your material varied in use and destination? There's a lot of things to take into account when you're choosing material, because you have to show material which is interesting and which takes your story forward. So here, this is the first postal law for Denmark, issued by King Christian IV of Denmark in 1624 on the 23rd of December. It's the original postal law. And it tells how mail is to be taken from Hamburg in Germany to Copenhagen. And it's quite rare. I have 2 of them. It's quite rare. But actually, it looks rare. doesn't it? It looks rare. It looks as though it's quite a tricky thing to have. There is a certain degree of, I'll use the English word, kidology in this. The judges don't know everything. And it helps if you can show them things which look exciting. And this is one of my favourite things. Here, this is a letter carried during the Napoleonic Wars by the French post office in Denmark between two Danish towns. It's the only one known between two Danish towns. So it's a new discovery. So you can demonstrate personal research by your choice of material. It looks like this was painted on yesterday. I mean, look at the cancellation. It could hardly be more perfect. This is the finest 2 shilling Schleswig-Holstein 1850 cover in existence. And I waited a long time for it. The quality of these marks may not look great, but that's as good as they come. And not only that, there are 4 of these marks, and this is the most rare. I don't bother showing the other ones. I only show the most difficult one. This is another, this Lauenburg. It's a little tiny part of what is now Hamburg in Germany. But what a fantastic postmark. And you can read the number clearly, and the handwriting is nice to look at. And, you know, aesthetically, it's very satisfactory. So when you're choosing your material, you go for the best you can find in the best quality you can find with the most, a friend of mine in the United States calls this eye candy. You look at it and you think, yes, I really like that. So eye candy. Eye candy. It's not the prettiest of covers, but it's, first of all, it's a postal stationery. Secondly, it's been uprated. Thirdly, it's got to where it was going to and it had to be forwarded, so you have the stamps of 2 different countries on it. And there's a lot more story to this as well, because I know the guy, I don't know the guy, I know the person, I know about the person who wrote it, and I know why it was posted, and I know which route it went. But it's an interesting cover to look at. This is from a little tiny place in this little tiny piece of land, little town called Gravenstein, Gråstein in Danish today, and it's been sent to San Francisco in 1866. And what a beautiful postmark. And how nicely they put the stamps on. And how attractive the different colours are. And it doesn't matter which country you're thinking about. It's like when you look at multiple frankings on an early Indian cover. You know, they're very nice colours, these first in the 1854 stamps, but you get different values together, different colours on the cover itself. So foreign destinations, attractive. This is also very pretty. The quality is great, but it's a rare usage. There was a special rate for sending letters between 2 places nearby on either side of the Danish-German border. So not a rare stamp, but a very rare usage. So you show the rarest and most difficult you can, and you have to know what the reason was that the rate was paid. This is a little tiny piece here. This is not there. This was the piece. And that's a postmark that doesn't exist outside the Postal Museum in Copenhagen. But we saw that, and wow, that's Assens Als. It was used for a few days. And so I show it by making the postmark and making it clear to the judge that they can understand what it is I'm showing. So this is rare. If I didn't do the picture to go with it, you wouldn't know what it was. So you try to make things clear. This King of Denmark died on the 16th? No, 15th. King of Denmark died on the 15th of November 1863. He was married to his third wife. She was called Countess Dana, Frivina Dana, and he died at his castle in Schleswig on the 15th of November 1863. And his wife wrote to the court in Denmark at 9:30 in the morning on the day that he died, saying, "The king is very ill, we must fear the worst." And that's what's written inside that letter. So it's a historical piece, but better still, the king had no children. And the Prussian minister, Bismarck, used the death of the king and the fact he had no children to start a war with Denmark to incorporate Schleswig and Holstein in Germany. It was the first war of German unification. So this is the letter that launched the first war of German unification, followed by the war they had with Austria, followed by the war they had with France, which led to Greater Germany, which led to the First World War. This is the cover that led to the First World War. If you believe that, you could believe anything. But you have to find ways of making your stuff attractive. And this is a super piece because it's got a good story behind it. Oh, and the First World War was a really terrible mess of a treaty that led to the Second World War. This is the cover that made modern Europe. And that's almost half true. Now, I said that the first 75 points are free. Now, I did this a while ago, now nearly 10 years ago. But if I did it tomorrow with the FIP results, it would be the same. So I looked at nearly 1,800 postal history results at FIP and FEPA, the European level, over the 10 years, 1998 to 2009, and the highest score was 98 and the lowest score was 63. Well, to try and sort of make the thing statistically a bit more effective, we just knocked the 5% at the top off, 5% at the bottom, and here we are. That's the whole range. Some interesting things. 199 exhibits got 90 points and only 19 got 89. 194 exhibits got 85 and only 21 got 84, because judges don't like giving you only 1 point below a medal, because they make exhibitors angry. When you get 74 and you didn't get 75, you get cross. When you get 89 and you didn't get 90 for a gold medal, you get even more cross. So judges are not stupid, and they try to avoid giving 89, 84, 79, and so on. There we go again, see, 94, 17, 95, 81. But if I take the bottom and the top off, 5% at the bottom and 5% at the, take the outliers away, really most of us are looking between 75 points and 95 points. That's 90% of exhibits score between 75 and 95. And the problem is, there they are, the problem is every point makes a huge difference, because there's only 20 points really that you're fighting about. So small improvements can make big differences. The difference between 83 points and 85 points is small numerically, but it's quite a big jump in terms of your medal. So you need to try to find ways of scoring every single point you can. As I said at the beginning, This is about exhibiting, which is nothing to do with the real world at all. This is about winning. Taking Frank's point, if you're going to exhibit, you do want to do well, so you need to fight for every point. So you have to consider presentation, treatment, knowledge, research as a whole thing if you're going to create a balanced and even exhibit. And I can't say this often enough. As an exhibition, the exhibitor is not present, and your exhibitor has to speak. Your exhibit has to speak for itself. So the way in which it looks and the way in which it's constructed is really important. It has to speak for itself. So we begin with presentation, because if your exhibit is not attractive, organised, coherent, balanced, complete, the judge will look at it and start with a bad impression. Oh, look at that. Why did he do that? Why did she? You wouldn't believe what she's done here. And you look at it and you're just going to make the 5 points. But we're human, it's human nature. You are influenced by the whole thing, not just the one small thing. So if it's not, if it doesn't look good, the judge is likely to think it's not good. So here's 5 points which can make a difference to a lot of the other points. Of course, what I'm saying is entirely exaggerated, but it's got enough truth in it to be important. So a presentation is a fundamental principle in exhibit construction. If your exhibit is not coherent, not well organised, not well structured, if your layout is not ideal, then your treatment will not be coherent, ideal, structured. So the way in which you make your exhibit, the way in which you design your exhibit is really important. Now, they say writing up should be clear, concise and relevant. Frank thinks that my writing up is not clear, concise. He argues whether or not, I would argue whether or not it's relevant, but it's as clear as it needs to be and it's as concise as it can be. And Frank still doesn't agree with me. But you should use a method of presentation which shows the material to its best effect. So you need to show balance in time. I said last night, if you're showing the Duchy of Schleswig 1624 to 1920, there has to be a good reason why it's 1624, the first postal law, 1920, the end of the Duchy of Schleswig in modern terms. But I can't show one piece from 1624 and the next piece from 1815. I have to have pieces in between, otherwise it's not balanced. And time balance is really important. Now what I do is I do something quite sneaky. I say early mail to 1867. Now early mail allows you to sneak a few things in early, you know. So there are ways of being clear, because early mail, judges quite like early mail in postal history, I think. So what I use and what you've got to consider is, do you use frames on your page? Do you use flags, coats of arms on your pages? What mounts do you choose? What shapes do you use? What fonts do you use? How do you use bold? How do you use italic lettering? How do you... what's the visual idea behind your texts? What sort of paper do you use? What sort of protectors do you use? What colours? And what illustrations and maps? And all of these things are part of presentation. They're also part of treatment, which is a problem. How much should you write? What does it look like on the page? Where have you put the best items on the page, on the frame? You've got 16 pages, 4 by 4. Where do you put the best items so that they're going to be seen? And then, can you put the best items out of context? So, you know, if one of my best items is going to appear on page 16 in the bottom right-hand corner, sometimes I can struggle to get it in line 2, in the 2 centres, which is the eye level for most judges. and sometimes you can't do it. But you have to judge where are you putting your stuff to have it seen by the judge. Do I have, Frank talked about story chapters, beginnings and ends, and I'll come back to that. Don't have any big white spaces. Make it look as though it's full. Because if it's not full, it's clearly missing something. You look at the frame, white space here, white space there, white space there, and you say to yourself, well, doesn't he have any more material? How do you draw attention to the best items you have? So as I say, they're linked together, your presentation and your treatment. And you also show your knowledge and research in the way in which you present things on the page and the way in which you treat them. And if you're showing your facts clearly, you help the judge understand what is the condition and rarity of the material that you're showing. Now, what I do is, here's my plan for my 8-frame exhibit. Do it differently from Frank, but I'm using the same principles. This is my first frame, this is what I'm showing, second frame, what I'm showing, third frame, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And it's, if you like, it's a road map. I put a road map for the jury on my front page. There's my title, Schleswig, from Danish duchy to Prussian province. I quite like alliteration, and some people think I do it too much, but I like Danish duchy, Prussian province. You know, it's got a little ring to it. But it's early mail to 1867. Why 1867? Because 1867, 31st December, was the last day before the German Empire took control of this area and they issued new stamps. So I stop because there are new stamps. I don't stop because it's the latest piece I've got. I stop because there's a postal reason to stop there. So here, we saw in frame 4, the first postage stamps in Schleswig-Holstein. Here's one of my pages. The first postage stamps in Schleswig-Holstein, so the first postage stamps in Schleswig, the first postage stamps in Schleswig. You see, the title at the top here is the same as the title in my plan. Underneath, here, I say a little more about the page. Here, top line, I say this is an April letter to the city of Schleswig, and the bottom one, I say, is what it is. So, the top 3 lines of all of my pages tell the story, and the titles I use relate entirely to the titles I have told the judge that they're going to see on the introductory page. So the heading in the plan is the same as the heading on the page. There's my story at the top in 3 lines, and then below I give more detail. The judge has maximum 15 minutes to go through an 8-frame, probably 10 or 12 minutes. So if I can tell my story in shorthand at the top of the page, I'm ahead of the game. And not only that, you teach the judge what you're doing. Red tick boxes, please don't use these because they'll think you've stolen them from me. Find another way. The tick boxes are simply to say this is important. 2 tick boxes, this is very important. Yeah, so there we are. Equivalence between the top of the page, the running header, and the plan. That Stege, S-T-E-G-E, is in blue. The Chancellor doesn't come out well here on the stamp, is in blue. So I actually put these in blue here. Stege in blue, that's blue. Mute cancel in blue, that's blue. Here, see the 34 is in black, and I put my 34 in black. So I help the judge see what it is I'm trying to show. It also saves me words, because if I write in blue, that's 2 words. If I use the colour blue, I've used one word. There we go again. BPA, Barnpost stamped, Renswood. BPA, Renswood is the same in my text as it is on the cover. And I use the same typeface. The postmark is a serifed typeface, and my text is a serifed typeface. Now this might seem a tiny bit over the top. It might seem like too much detail. But what I'm trying to do is to give the judge the idea that I am consistent in my approach all the way through the exhibit. And I do it all the way through. I always do the dates the same way. Beata doesn't like them, but I always do them the same way. The number always comes before the month always comes before the year, and I put a TH after the date numeral. So it says 8th, not 8. And all the way through, it's the same. So at the bottom you can see 9th April 1851. Always in the same structure. And there's my ticks, yeah? That's important. So what I'm demonstrating more than anything else here is care. Carefulness. And accuracy. So you're giving the judge the impression that you know what you're doing and you're doing it well. Oh yeah, the other thing I do is, here you see this says FCO. FCO, that's short for Franco, that means paid. So in my text, I put Franco in handwriting, in manuscript. So the judge can quickly see what's on the cover is what's on the page, which is what's in the text, and they're all related one to the other. Another exhibit, this is a different exhibit. And here, you can see Haderslev with serifs, Haderslev with serifs. Here you can see that I've taken the address in manuscript from the envelope and I've put it in manuscript. Where you're telling the judge that this is a rare single franking, make sure the judge can see it. So I take my rarity statement out of the main text. At the bottom, this example believed to be unique. Open brackets E, close brackets E, that means I've got an expert certificate. The expert certificate is on the back. So and red tick boxes at the top. Always use the same system. You need to teach the judge what your conventions are quickly, so they know what's rare. Don't use different systems in the same exhibit. Yeah, because when judges know what the conventions are, they don't have to learn them again. The worst thing you can get is the judge, there's three of them, they're going through the exhibit and they get to the third frame and they say, what on earth is happening here? You have to go back to the introductory page, try to understand what's going on. You read the introductory page, you go back to the third frame, you look at the third frame, you still don't know what's going on because the exhibitor's changed his mind about how he's doing things, and you begin to lose patience. At this point, you look at your watch and you think, we've got to get on to the next one. Now, that's not good, but it's a fact. So teach the judge the stuff quickly and make sure that it's in your introductory page that they've seen before so they know what to expect. There we go. Rarity statements. There. Oh, it gets worse. Much, much, much worse. You see, I always use these pages at 288 millimeters by 218 millimeters, and my pages are always the same. I always have a 2 centimeter margin at the top and a 1.5 centimeter margin on all of the other sides, and they're always the same. And I always use these fonts. I only use these fonts. I don't use any different fonts. I have a footer down. I don't do this anymore. This is a waste of time. But I used to put the name of the exhibition at the bottom. And I did that trying to tell the judge that I've done this especially for this exhibition. So this isn't something I just made earlier. This is something I've made specially for this show. But that's just too much trouble and I don't do it anymore. So everything is always there. That box is always left to the margin and always 1 centimetre below the top of the page. It's always the chapter heading. And I never begin a chapter in the middle of a row. And the right box is 1.3 centimetres below the top of the page because it's inferior to the chapter heading. And it's always to the right of the page. And I describe in 1 line what's on the page for each item. And I say if it's important. And the bottom box sits on the bottom margin. And the width is margin to margin, so I can centre things so they're always the same. And my boxes are 0.5 centimetres on each side wider and taller than my items. And the top box is always 2.5 centimetres below the top of the page. Sometimes you run out of space and it's 2.6, 2.7, 2.8, but you try to keep it the same. And it's centred. That's the width of the page and centred. It's 188 millimetres. That's constructed the same way as the top one. Oh, and then what I do is I justify north-south on the page so that this space and this space and this space are always the same. Yeah, so, and that invariably is the centre of my page. Okay. And then what I do is I write my piece up here for the description, and I put in italics the research. Don't do what I do, just think about what I do and think about how you can apply it to what you do. And there's a frame. And you can see what happens because of the way I've constructed it. The top of the page always runs in a straight line, so you don't get ups and downs. But the pieces are not always in the same place on the page, so you get variety. And if I take my chapter headings, my subheadings, they tell the story running through the page. And so my treatment is told in this story going through the page from page 1 on the frame to page 16 on the frame. And these are my headings on each of these lines: redirected and rerouted mail, redirected and rerouted mail, redirected and rerouting mail. That's chapter, in my case, section 16. And then I start a new section 17 at the beginning of the next line, not in the middle of the next line. And I start telling my story again. So my headings and my subheadings all the way through tell my treatment. Chapter headings tell the story, the subheadings carry the story forward. Okay, it takes a lot of work. It really does take a lot of work. But after a time, you know exactly what you're doing. So it's actually quite quick. Deciding what your standards are is what takes the time. Because today I can make, I can write a frame in a day if I get the research done. I can write a frame in a day. That's a lucky day. And it should be possible to follow the treatment using my headers alone. Now, I try to get balance on the frame, and you can see I've done it here. So here's my little maps, and there's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And you know, they balance out on the page. And this one's good because here I show the marks, and here they are, they go that way, and here they are, they go that way. So the pages make brackets on the line. And I've talked already about don't stretching the material and the material being balanced. Here's half a frame. That's that half a frame I was just showing you. This one works quite well because I've got balance in the center, the covers are balanced on either side, there's a large piece on the left and a large piece on the right. This one is irritating because it doesn't really quite balance, but actually because I put it in brackets on either side, it doesn't matter. And sometimes it's really hard to get the thing in the right place on the page, because sometimes you have to break your own rules because the story doesn't work. Paper. Don't use thin paper. Don't use bright paper. Don't use ultra white paper. Choose paper that supports and enhances your material. A very famous exhibitor who has more gold medals than anybody else I know nearly uses the worst possible paper, and it's really annoying if you're the commissioner, because you try to put it up in the frames and it just falls towards you. And the gentleman lives in Hong Kong, and it's really annoying. And it shows disrespect, I think, for his material. So you have to demonstrate that you respect your material. Yeah, and it shows respect for the audience too. And believe me, you know, the commissioner or the mounter who's trying to put your stuff in the frames, you don't know he's not going to say to the judge, God, this was really hard to mount, he's using rubbish paper. You don't know this. It shouldn't happen, but it does. So, what size do you use? Well, I tell you what size you use. Use the size that suits your material. And Frank went through all of these yesterday. I use acid-free paper. I use white or off-white or cream. I don't use dark colours. And one of the rules, for those of you who were here last night, says don't use black paper. Well, what weight do you use? How many grams per square metre? I use the best the printer can take. As I say, consider the mounter. I use chemically inert polymer protectors because it's otherwise going to damage the material. This is all about respect and getting the judge to understand that you respect your material, you understand your material, you're on top of your material. And then we come to layouts. Well, some people love to have frames on every page. And then it looks really nice for the first 10 pages, and then the next one they've got a piece and it's too big and it goes over the edges of the frames. What's to be done? Don't use frames. If it doesn't work, don't do it. I mean, I started off, I used to have a Schleswig-Holstein flag, a Danish flag, a Prussian flag, I had frames, I had all sorts of wonderful things, and I thought it looked fantastic until I started to try to mount the pieces on the page and they didn't fit. So you do what works. We talked about matting yesterday. Typeface, don't mix too many typefaces. Some people look as though they've got the sort of the typeface box for Christmas, especially with, you know, how many thousands of fonts do you get in your word processing programs these days? Pick a few. And you've seen how I use colour. You've seen how I use italics. You see how you can vary the point size for headings, 14 point, 12 point. Don't use 8 point. Some people want to say a lot and they use 8 point text and no judge on the planet can read it. We're all of a certain age. I try to use 12-point. And mostly I get away with it. So just think about it. Use black. I use brown. Some people don't like my brown print. Frank doesn't like my brown print. But I don't care. Because I like my brown print. And the judges have never complained about it. If the judges had complained about it, I might have changed my mind. But it's too late now. They're all in brown, and that's it. So I use brown on cream paper. Frank, you only use black, don't you?
Red for highlights.
Red for highlights, yeah. So, but, you know, you establish your own standards. I said to those of you who were here last night, go and look at other people's exhibits and steal the best ideas. But ultimately, it's your exhibit, it's your exhibit, it's your exhibit. So you do what you think is right and what's the most comfortable, what's right for your material. Everybody collects different material. And even if we collect the same material, we do it in different ways, so you have to work out what is right for you. Now I use headers, as I've pointed out. I think that helps. These running headers, I think, help the judge follow the story all the way through from the beginning to the end. And I'm just going through, explaining, repeating what I've done all the way through. Follow the same rules. I tell you, it's really interesting when you're looking at an exhibit and you're judging it and you can see that, do you know, he just bought that page, he just bought that item because he's had to make a new page. And the paper's a different colour. You know, it's quite cream here, but it's light cream there, because the exhibitor was such a cheapskate, he only bought enough paper for his exhibit. He was not planning ahead. It looks horrible, I promise you. So, as I say, you should do what works for you. And you should capture the interest of the juror. And that goes back to your choice of material, how you present it, how it's structured on the page, how it's laid out on the page, how one page relates to the next page, how the pages relate to each other on the frame, how one frame relates to the next frame and the next frame, and how the whole exhibit is put together as a single entity. Right. Introductory pages. 50% of all introductory pages at FIP exhibitions are hopeless. Is that right? 40% of all introductory pages at FIP elections are less than satisfactory. Better? Okay. You write your introductory page last, so that it fits what you've got in the frames. You need to say what the aim is, like 5 lines. You need to explain what the structure is. That's my framework, my plan. Now you always get plans in thematic exhibits, it's a rule. But you have plans now in all classes. It's not a rule, but it's a very, very good idea. I put in a short historical background. Now that's because Peter and I are both historians, and we only collect the postal history material so we can tell the story of a history of a nation or of a place or of a time or what. But I put in the historical context. I say, how do I use abbreviations? What are the basic conventions? What does a red box, what does a red tick mean? Tell the judge. I used to be a school teacher in a very rough part of London, a place called Hackney. And my head teacher, deputy head teacher, said to me on the first day, Mr. King, in this school what we do is we tell them we've told them, and then we tell them again. And normally they remember. Same with judges. Tell them you've told them, tell them again. And be consistent all the way through. I like images, I like maps. Those maps you saw earlier on, I always use the same map. Because you see some exhibits where you've got a map in colour, you've got a map which is lined, you've got a map which is coloured in blue, you've got this, you've got that, you've got the other, and what you mainly get is dog's breakfast. You have to think a little bit like a graphic designer. Plan. I've told you again, and I've told you. A bibliography. Now some people will put in everything they've ever read on the subject. You have to choose the main things. I can tell you from postal history, I've got an unfortunate subject because most of the stuff that I'm looking at is written either in German or in French. So I start with an advantage, which is I baffle the judges, because when they look at my bibliography, it's in German or in French, so I must have read something that they can't read. No, it's important to actually give the judge something they can access, so they can go away and research what it is that they're going to judge, that you've spent such a lot of time putting together in the frames. You must help the judge, and you have to help the judge by including a short bibliography of things which they're going to be able to find. We're very lucky in London because I've never asked the library at the Royal for a book that they haven't found. And I've asked for some very strange stuff. They will actually make copies. They won't thank me for telling you this, but they will make copies. They'll charge you a small fee, but they're very, very good. Bibliography. So as I say, if the judge is not told where to find the information, don't be surprised if they don't know anything. You think of a court case. The advocate stands up and tells the judge what he needs to know. Also tells them which law and which section and which paragraph. And you're doing the same thing. Oh, well, the other thing is reference yourself if possible. We've all said that. So there we are. These are titles of exhibitions or exhibits that we've seen in the past. Österreichische Internationale Korrespondenz in Europe, in Europa. Austrian International Correspondence in Europe. Now, where does that begin? And where does that end? Another exhibit was called Vienna. The Old Letters of Belarus. That's like having something called the Old Letters of Bangalore. I mean, where does it begin and where does it end? The postal history of Bosnia-Herzegovina. No dates. I mean, when do they start? You can find letters from the 16th century, from the Ottoman domination of Bosnia-Herzegovina. The postal history of Brno. Cancellations from the Danzig area. Dutch colonies, postal routes and rates. Which ones? There are, it's quite fun to collect titles. You should go and get a palmarès and just read through the titles and figure out which ones you can actually understand. And it's probably 70 or 80%. There'll be probably 20% which are a mystery. So there's my title, there's my aim. This exhibit shows mail within, to and from the Duchy of Schleswig, etc., etc., etc. And it's, I hope, clear. Am I going on too long?
No, we are enjoying.
5 to 10 minutes.
Thank you. So, structure, what's my beginning, what's my end? A background. I explain why it's rare, my material, because the population of this area was only 300,000 for most of its existence. Most of them couldn't write. And those that could write were merchants, and the farmers, even if they could write, didn't bother to write because they had to spend money on it. And you know, farmers don't like spending money. There's my conventions. These are my abbreviations. So, you know, I use CBS. Everybody knows that CBS is circular date stamp, but I tell them. I use a little train. That's my little train. I was terribly proud of my little train, which shows railway posts. I've never managed to make a little boat. There's my plan. It's an exact guide. There's my bibliography and sources. Okay, now, thorny question about pictures. I use pictures. This one I love because it's from the Illustrated London News. It's from February the 20th, 1864, which is at the beginning of this war period that I show part of. And it's a picture of the Prussian mail on its way to the front. And I show it with a piece of Prussian mail. It belongs exactly. The image is closely related to the item of postal history. That is okay. Read the guidelines for postal history 2C. Oh yes, yeah. You see, one of the issues is you can download these things from the internet. Now, I don't like that. I think that you should have collected the item yourself, personally. So it says here, from a copy of the periodical owned by the exhibitor. Now, of course, the judge has to just believe me, but it is nonetheless true. I do own that periodical, as I own this one. This is from a Danish journal called the Illustrated Times, Illustrative Tidende, 7th of February 1864, and it's the Danish soldiers receiving the mail at the camp at the front. It is closely related to the pieces of postal history that I am showing. Read the guidelines in Postal History 2C, and it will tell you that this is permissible. If a judge ever says this is not permissible, you shouldn't do this, do feel free to say, can you show me in the regulations where it says that, please? Don't say, you should know it's in the regulations. Ask them to show you, because some judges get behind with things, and 2C is only 20 years old. I use maps. Always the one on the left, and contrary to what I said, I use the one on the right because it's the only one that shows these two places, Shrink and Fredericia. Relevant maps. Not pretty maps because you like them, relevant maps because they belong. So, to summarize, your exhibit is cohesive. There must be a storyline, a red thread which connects the first page to the last page all the way through. The red thread should be of the same thickness all the way through. You must lead the judge, the viewer, from page to page with my running headers. And you must make it interesting visually and textually. Each page must be balanced. Each frame should be balanced. The material should be balanced, and there should be no chronological gaps. No big white spaces that you can park a truck in. Material must be carefully selected. Because it's composed of lots of disparate efforts, you have to make an effort to link them together. You've got to make the single artifact from your many parts of the art. It's like Lego. And the judge will use the judging criteria to evaluate it. So this is a synthesis. It's not a series of individual parts. It's a whole, and it has to respect all the judging criteria. All right. Thank you. Do we do questions or do we do lunch? You want to do lunch? You want to do questions?
The questions relate to the lunch.
Question one, is it time for lunch yet? So there you are. I mean, if you want to ask me things, please do. I mean, I can take 3 questions. There you go. Yes, please. Is it time for lunch?
You know, you mentioned degree degree of difficulty. You said, mentioned degree of difficulty and philatelic interest. There's an inverse relationship here, you know, because the more esoteric the subject is, the less people would have been aware of it, and the less sort of general interest it would have. Second point is, you mentioned graphic designers, okay, correct, and you mentioned white spaces. Okay. The jury is out. Most graphic designers will tell you the jury is out on the judicious use of white spaces. No white spaces, the thing looks too busy, the eye cannot absorb it, and not can the brain absorb it, right? Yeah. So I think you have to be a little careful. You know, I wouldn't go about counseling that there should be no white spaces in it. I would certainly counsel there should not be too much white space in it. But I think what is required is a judicious balance.
I think that's absolutely right, that what's required is a judicious balance. But two things. One, when I look at the sales that are on in the shops, and they take the full page in the local newspaper, they always fill it. And there are no white spaces. And these people are selling things for a living. Now, why do they do that and they don't put the white spaces in? Now, if I'm going to buy a nice piece of very expensive furniture, there'll be a lot of white space around it. And of course, you're right. My wife will tell me that I don't have enough white space. And sometimes she's right, of course. And sometimes I'm right, of course. And it's your exhibit, so you make your choices. On the question of esoteric material, well, actually, if you're going to go for the wow factor, sometimes you have to show esoteric material. But I'd say one other thing. It's really important that you include the other material, which is much less expensive and even less interesting, because sometimes you can't tell the story without having the normal things in it. So you must always try to tell the whole story. And that means having the fancy pieces, but also having the pieces that simply add to the whole story. So, of course, so you're absolutely right. But then, of course, we're all absolutely right when it comes to making our own exhibit. And it's your choice in the end. One more, yes?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Yeah. The question related to the postal history, actually. See, if I look at the postal history exhibit, there are 3 points come to my mind. Number one, it is the revenue, which is linked with the postal history. Second one is logistic, and the third one is the social reflection. Now, traditionally, the postal department is actually part of the revenue department, never been focused on the logistics. So when do you exhibit a postal history, which one you give any importance in terms of the preference, either is a social reflection, a revenue, or logistics?
Do you know, I don't really know the answer to the question. I think what you've got to do is to figure out how you're going to tell your story. And if you're looking at the history of the Postal Service, or the history of the revenue of the Postal Service, or the history of the equipment they use to carry the mail, you make your own definition at the beginning with your title and your aim. So I can't answer your question yes or no. I can only answer your question by saying you have to decide. But what you must do is to do what both Frank and I have said, is on your introductory page, you must tell the judge or the jury or the jurors what it is you're trying to achieve. So you can do one or the other, but you need to be clear about what it is you're doing from the beginning.
So the scope needs to be defined based on this purpose.
You have to define your scope yourself, and it has to fit the guidelines. But you can, there's a secret here. The more successful you are as an exhibitor, the more you can push the boundaries. So when you're just starting, please don't push the boundaries. But if you get a reputation for getting golds and large golds all the time, you can push the boundaries, because whatever happens, the judge might just think you know what you're doing. So, but don't do it as a beginner, because you'll make a huge mistake.
Thank you.
One last question.
So, consider I have like two different chapters, one for like showing different cancellations and other for different routes. But the problem is I have only one cover. It might be like only one recorded, or I can't afford to have like two different of the same variety. So how can I solve this when I have to use only one cover, but I have in two different entirely big chapters?
And they're two different, it's the same exhibits.
Same exhibit, only one cover.
Well, you've got to make your mind up, haven't you? I'm sorry, that's not a yes or no question either. You just have to make your mind up. Which is the better use of the piece?
Okay.
You know, is it better that it's a fine strike of the mark and you want to use it for that purpose? Or is it best because it's an interesting route, because it was diverted, because there was a war wherever it might have been in 1872, and so it had to go this way, not that way. So you've got to decide what it is that tells your story the best. And if there's one lesson that I'd like to leave you with, it's your exhibit. You have to make your own mind up. You get to make the context. You get to set the scope. You get to buy the material. You get to mount the material. And it's your job to persuade the judge that you've done it well.
So are there any examples that someone has attempted to blend two chapters? Like showing the same cover at the end and shorting another chapter?
No. Using the same piece twice?
Yeah.
No. I wouldn't do that. Because you're wasting space. Or you're actually not showing enough material. I mean, I said this was the last thing. Here's the last thing. Sometimes you, as a judge, you look at this and there's one piece per page, and you count it up and it's 128 pages and this person's got 130 covers. And you think, where's the rest of it? Because you look at my exhibit, I think I've got 220 covers in the same 128 pages. It's your choice. It's your choice. And the key thing is that so many people come to events like this, they want to know, what's the rule? What must I do? And it doesn't work, because every single one of us has got a different exhibit and a different approach and a different knowledge and understanding. So your task is to do the best you can with your stuff in your exhibit in the framework which the FIP guidelines and regulations set out. Everybody's in this for themselves. And the other thing is, ask your friend. I tell you what, mount it in two different places, say to another person or to a judge, what do you think? And they'll give you three different answers if you ask three different judges, and then you're going to have to make your own mind up. Okay, it really must be lunchtime. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris, for the wonderful presentation. And as they say, the moral of the story, the punchline of your presentation, what I learned is the thread, the red thread, which has to maintain throughout the exhibit. And I'm sure everybody had understand the concept